Good evening. This is a regular meeting of the El Centro City Council. A few housekeeping items before we began. Outside that glass door and to your right are the restrooms. Those of you who wish to address the council, we ask you go to the podium to my right and use the microphone and speak clearly into the microphone. This is a little unusual for us in this particular setting. Want to make sure that we're going to be recorded appropriately. And the council members will be sharing a mic, so we hope that you will be able to hear us as we speak to you. We'll have roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis-Walker.
Here.
Councilmember Silva. Absent. Councilmember Jackson.
Here.
Mayor Sanders.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Solomon.
Here.
Okay. We will have the City Attorney, Ms. Becker, report from closed session, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On a motion by Councilmember Cheryl Villegas-Walker, seconded by Councilmember Efrain Silva, the City Council met in closed session at 5:03 p.m. Pursuant to the closed session statement posted with the agenda, all council members were present. The City Council discussed the employment agreement of the City Attorney. There is final action to report on this matter, which is that on a motion by Councilmember Jackson, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Solomon, Resolution 1201 relating to establishing the compensation and employment terms for the position of City Attorney was rescinded, and Resolution 1204 reestablished the compensation and employment terms for the position of City Attorney. The motion carried unanimously and closed session concluded at 5:09 p.m. And that concludes my report, Madam Mayor.
We'll have our Pledge of Allegiance by Councilmember Jackson and invocation by Councilmember Walker.
Please join me. Ready to begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please bow your heads. Heavenly Father, thank you for this great nation. Thank you for the opportunity for us to meet freely here to conduct the business of this city. Help us to be mindful of our many blessings. Help us to make good, wise decisions. All these things we ask in thy name. Amen.
Amen.
This is a public meeting, and if there is an item on the agenda on which you wish to be heard, please complete a speaker slip and submit it to the city clerk prior to the start of the meeting. When the item is announced, your name is called by the mayor. Please come forward to the microphone, stating your name and address to the council and for the record. Unless the mayor extends the time, there is a 3-minute time limit for each presentation. If you wish to address the council on any subject matter within the council's jurisdiction that is not listed on this agenda, you may do so during the public comment portion of the agenda. I have no presentations or announcements, and we will hear Mr. Curtis did call. Mr. Jackson reported that Mr. Curtis did call and said that he would not be able to be with us tonight. I think his wife is not feeling too well. But we will hear from the chamber if they would come forward to you. Use the microphone. Yeah. Thank you.
Not that I need a microphone.
Ooh, good evening. It's been a little while since I've seen you guys, so I wanted to report some great past events we had, December and kind of January. We had the great mixer at KC Welding, which is, of course, I mentioned before, a family business that's been around for a long time. And we'd like to commend you and thank you for a beautiful and great ribbon cutting and opening over there at the clinic. That's nice to see. And well needed, so we look forward to that. Of course, last week, I'm sure you all know, we had the Joint Chambers had the business showcase, and the El Centro Chamber is a big part of that and very involved with that, so we felt like that was a very big success. It just seems like it keeps getting better and better every year, so we're excited about that. I wanted to report that the young professionals had their leadership development seminar. It was kind of the first of a series that they're started. I think they've got about almost 9 or 10 planned for this year, so it's very exciting. And that one was the one that they had with Louise Plancarte doing the Myers-Briggs, which was very nice of them. They helped out a lot, kind of supplementing all those educational supplies and leadership, of course. And of course, we had the Snowbird Breakfast this past Saturday. And thank you, Mayor Sanders, and everyone that was there to support all our beautiful winter visitors, which we're so grateful to have. Looking forward to some upcoming events. State of the City, of course, is just around the corner, and proud to partner with you guys and look forward to that. And the Air Show Gala, of course, on February 3rd, and looking forward to the wonderful Mardi Gras events that you guys put on. So with that, that's my report, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're now ready for our consent agenda. All items, consent agenda items are approved by one motion. Council members or members of the public may pull a consent item to be considered separately at the time determined by the mayor. So is there any item that the council wish to pull?
7.
7. Any other item? Yeah. Okay, so you're moving for approval of 3 through 6?
Yeah, 3 through 6
And-
through 13.
Okay,
Second.
okay. Been moved by Jackson, second by Walker for the consent agenda approval. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Motion carries unanimously. Item 7, Ms. Walker?
Kind of a cleanup, but it's also more of a policy consideration as well. Page 14 of the agreement, section 7.8. A particular section has to do with jurisdiction and venue, which we agree with. That's going to be County of Imperial, State of California. As currently drafted, the provision is silent as to the issue of attorney's fees. And I know this council has gone back and forth as to whether or not we want to include attorney fee provisions within our contracts where prevailing party has to pay, or should each party pay its own attorney's fees. Sometimes the courts have looked kind of differently, I think, with regard to public agencies, if they have in-house attorneys versus if we had to go out and hire counsel. Right now, the agreement is silent, and I was asking city attorney, I'd provided advance notice that I'd be pulling this item as to whether or not there was a recommendation coming from our city attorney's office as to how this agreement may be revised.
It would be my recommendation that we add an attorney's fee provision for the prevailing party. But certainly it's the council's decision. I did do, Councilmember Walker did ask me to do some research as to whether or not the city could receive an attorney's fee award if my office, which is your in-house counsel, handled it. And there is case law out there that says that yes, in fact, in-house counsel can receive an attorney's fee award. An attorney representing itself in pro per cannot, but in-house counsel representing a corporation or an agency can receive an attorney's fee award, and there's a manner in which that is calculated.
Is that something that happens quite a bit? Is that something that happens quite a bit? Where
In-house counsel
in-house counsel
seeking attorney's fees?
Right.
You know, I'm not sure how frequently it happens. There is reported case law on it, so it's been dealt. The questions come up in the past, but
So-
I'm really not certain if that's.
But if it is anything, it would be worth our while.
Well, but Ms. Becker, I guess what I would be most interested in is there a bigger deterrent? Because it seems like the city has unfortunately been hit with attorney fee provisions in the past where either as part of a negotiated settlement or a case that's gone bad for the city where we have been faced with a prevailing party as opposed to each bears their own costs and then walks away. Has there been any research that you're aware of that an attorney fee provision is advantageous in some circumstances or not advantageous in another? Does it act as a deterrent to getting sued, or is there any research that you're aware of that's out there?
I haven't conducted any research on that particular issue, but it's been my experience with my prior employers that it has acted as a deterrent because that's something that you're thinking about. Well, if this goes south, you know, when you're doing your cost-benefit analysis of litigation, that's if this goes south, that's another thing we're going to have to pay for. So, do we want to settle now, or do we want to even not go to court at all? So, in my prior experience, it has acted as a deterrent, I think.
Well, based on that, Madam Mayor, I'd move for approval of...
No,
I'm
I just
sorry.
want to second it.
Okay, move for approval of item 7 with a revision to section 7.8 to provide prevailing party with attorney's fees.
It's been moved by Ms. Walker and second by Councilmember Solomon. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries unanimously. You know, I guess even though the motion is, we've completed this motion, Mr. Duran, have you noticed anything unusual in this preparation of this particular document?
For the item for number
Yes.
7?
Yes.
Not particularly, no. Again, it just, we would place that in the discussion of the business decision in the matter of litigation, which is typically, in the last 8 years, we've not included this. So it's not unusual. It's just one where there's a decision needs to be made for those items.
Okay. Then we're ready now for item number 14, which is a public hearing to consider the amendments to its 2011 and 2012 Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, annual action plan associated with the temporary library relocation, indoor sports complex, and sidewalk improvement program. Presentation will be made by Mrs. Pedra.
Yes, good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. The item before you is consideration to amend our approved annual action plan, which is funded by our Community Development Block Grant Program. This plan covers the fiscal year 2011-2012, and the amendment for you to consider tonight is to make some adjustments or make some changes to the existing projects that were included in the annual action plan that was presented to you. The specific activities to be amended include the funds that were set aside for the temporary relocation of the library, also the indoor sports complex project, which those two activities or those two projects were originally included in our annual action plan, and the modification that we are asking for are to consider including the sidewalk improvement program, which is a program that we have funded in the past with CDBG funds. The reason we are asking for this amendment has to do with an expenditure rate that we are required to have with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is the agency that provides us with the CDBG funds. And the reason for this amendment has to do with the fact that on April 30th of this year, HUD conducts a timeliness test in which they check basically our line of credit that we have with HUD, and if we exceed by 1.5, when they do a testing, if we exceed the funds in that particular line of credit, we could run the risk of them reducing funds in the future to the city. Therefore, what we are asking for is consideration to reallocate the full amount that was set aside for the temporary relocation of the library, which is $103,290, and $77,000 that was set aside for the indoor sports complex. We are asking that you consider relocating, amending these two amounts to the sidewalk improvement program. By doing so, we will be able to fulfill and be within the expenditure rate that HUD requires the city to be. As you may recall, in December, you approved a contract to do sidewalk improvements to Barbara Worth. This project has been awarded, and we are ready to start with the project. Therefore, we should be within the time frame to expend funds if we consider doing this amendment. The total amounts to be considered for amendment are $180,290. As included in the staff report, the timeliness test requires that we be less than $1 million within this line of credit, and right now we're obviously at that particular amount. Therefore, it's important that we consider this amendment to our plan in order to not have any issues with our funding in the future with HUD. And this pretty much summarizes what is being considered before you. If there's any questions that you have specifically to this item, I'll be more than happy to answer those at this time.
Are there any questions for Ms. Piedra?
Ms. Piedra, how do we anticipate the backfill then for those two allocations?
With respect to the temporary library relocation, I emailed you a message, and this is relating to a conversation that we had with the program manager from HUD. Initially, we had a conversation with our CDBG representative, which indicated that we could use CDBG funds from, I guess, the other non-public service category that we could use under urgent need amount of the $100,000 to pay for the temporary relocation of the library. However, I guess in HUD doing more research on that and based on the criteria to meet under urgent need, it appears that we might not be able, that we can't use those non-public service funds for the temporary relocation of the library. They indicate that we can use the public service category, which overall we have a cap of 15%, which reduces the amount of funding that we have available to us. But we can consider it under that specific category because in essence they see that, you know, the library is providing a public service, therefore we can consider it under that category. So that's going to be presented to you when we do when we prepare our next annual action plan for fiscal year 2012-13. With respect to the sports complex, again, we are going to be recommending that the $77,000 that we are amending at this time be also included for consideration during our next fiscal year.
Okay.
And basically the issue is the completion of
Right.
projects. And the library obviously is taking up what HUD considers a substantial amount, along with the indoor sports complex, which has been a project that we've had some delays. And so that's, we have allocated a significant amount of CDBG funds to this project. And so that's why right now we find ourselves in this situation with the expenditure rate.
So it's a timing issue.
It's a timing issue.
And we anticipate the backfill then coming from the
Yes,
next
and-
cycle of CDBG.
That's
funding.
correct.
Okay.
Are
Thank
there
you.
any other questions? I have a question. Oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
go ahead.
Ms. Pedra, the backfill, is that going to be sufficient, or will we have to use funds from some other funding stream?
If you're referring to the sports complex specifically, with the $77,000, we, based on our budget, of course, we have redevelopment dollars for that project, so that's a different conversation. But based on the funding that we have now, we can complete the sports complex based on the information that we're getting. So we should be able to do that. With respect to the library relocation, and I know our Director of Finance is going to be discussing that later when she does her general fund presentation. Initially, when we budgeted the amounts for the lease agreement, we knew that there was going to be certain number of months that were going to have to be covered by another funding source with the lease. Given that when we do our annual action plan, even though we start off the fiscal year in July, we don't get approval until September. And so we basically only covered 9 months with CDBG funding. So we were already anticipating covering a certain number of months from other non-CDBG funds. Therefore, there has to be other alternative funding sources that have to be considered for the library lease.
Mr. Solomon, you have a question?
No, you asked.
Okay. Any additional questions?
I make a motion then.
Okay. It's been moved by Mr. Solomon and, I'm sorry.
It's a public hearing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the reminder. This is a public hearing. Is there anybody in the audience who wish to speak on either side of this issue, either in favor or against? Seeing no one come forward, come back to council and close the public hearing. It's been moved by Mr. Solomon. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Second by Ms. Walker. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're ready for item 15 under our unfinished business category. It's a discussion and any necessary action regarding the extension of existing uncodified ordinances for the deferral of developer impact fees and sewer and water capacity fees. Presentation will be by Mr. Williams, our building official.
Good evening, Council, Mayor and Council. Bob Williams, building official. This item is before you as a continuation or extension of an existing ordinance for the deferral of development impact fees and sewer water capacity fees. It came before you in December of 2010, and it's due to expire on February 1st of this year. So I brought it back to you for your decision on it to extend it for an additional year. What it does, it's an ordinance that allows larger projects, allows developers to pay their general fund fees, their permits, their building permits, and their plan check fees, those types of fees, and allows the deferral of the impact fees, the higher fees, the sewer and water capacity fees, till the end of the project. Either a final inspection by my department or at C of O or a time designated by the city manager. And it like I say, it's an existing ordinance that's currently active. It's uncodified, and it's due to expire on February 1st of this year. I have a presentation here if you'd like to see it. This is the rationale again, and I've kind of already gone over it. It's to allow, excuse me, it's to allow the projects that have higher fees can apply for this deferral, and this is an example of the types of fees that we're talking about, the amounts of fees. This fee over here, the $24,000, would be paid at the issuance of the building permit, and then at the C of O or final of the project, then this is the remainder fee that would be due and payable. This is actually a current project that we have, El Centro Family Apartments.
This is the 8th Street project,
Yes.
Mr. Williams. Let me ask a clarifying question then for the city attorney, because I believe the bank I work for is providing
This is the Chelsea project.
some gap funding for this, correct?
It's only a presentation, it's not part of any action.
Well, except that they would benefit from the continuation of this ordinance, or they're already getting the benefit
Yes,
of the
they would.
ordinance?
They would. I think you're right, Ms.
Which?
Walker.
Are they already subject to the deferral, or they've requested the deferral, but they haven't received it yet?
The
I guess
agreement has already been approved by the city council for that contract. This is on the deferral we spoke of earlier. Yeah.
So it's really a timing issue. We approved the ordinance, they became subject to it, and now they would remain subject to it regardless of what action they took. So we're okay, right?
Right.
Thank you.
This one I just gave as an example.
Right.
Actually, there's a note in here somewhere that this
Approved. Okay.
has already
Thank
been
you, Mr.
approved.
Williams.
Yes. Another one. This is this is an example. The Imperial Valley Mall condo project that previous to this original approval, they had requested this as well. We don't know. We're not sure that project is going to come to fruition, but. The summary and conclusion, as I mentioned, that the fees would be due and payable at the time of the final building inspection or at issuance of certificate of occupancy, or 1 year from the date of deferment, whichever occurs first or as required by the city manager. And that's my presentation.
I would like to.
I have a question.
Ms. Walker?
How are we tracking these deferrals so that we know who's requested what and when they'll ultimately be paid?
Well, at this point, there's only one that I'm aware of. Are we tracking it through?
Acela or whatever the
Excel.
software is?
Yeah, it's the Excella Permits Plus program.
Okay.
Cheryl makes a good point, but also I would like to just add that because of the economic conditions in our housing and construction market, I believe that this is an excellent ordinance. It's good for small businesses, and it makes it easier for businesses to do business in this city if they know that they can postpone the higher fees that they would have to pay till toward the end of the project. So I just think it's a win-win for us.
That's exactly the reason behind it. We noticed before the initial adoption that this was a big stumbling block for a lot of the developers. So we tried to come up with an idea that took that into consideration, and this certainly has worked in the agreement that we currently have.
Mayor, if I also may add
Sure.
to this. The other part of this is we sat down with the development community early on last year, Mr. Williams did, and we found that in the construction loans, getting the fees financed was very difficult. But typically, they can do that if the C of O is imminent. Then the financing, the companies doing the financing will finance that last piece. If we've indicated it is all ready for a C of O, they get the financing. But that gap financing has been very difficult, and this has been assisted. Most recently, developers did come forward, and they asked for that are looking at starting homes again, the same option that whether or not we were going to extend it, and we indicated it was our intent to. Mr. Williams was part of that meeting. So this has become a useful tool. Hopefully that will start that process again. So it's our recommendation that you do pass this, extend it.
What's the pleasure of council?
I'd move staff's recommendation to approve ordinance number 12-01 and codified ordinance of the City Council of the City of El Centro, California, providing for the deferral of payment of certain development impact fees, waive reading and pass as a first reading.
It was moved by Walker, second by Solomon. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. A motion carries unanimously with one absent. We're ready for our new business, which is appointments. Each council member had the distinct pleasure of submitting their requested appointments, and I did the best I could to try and accommodate your interest, and at the same time spread out the various workloads so that we would all have an equal share. For the ICTC, or sometimes known as IVAG, the rep would be Sanders, alternate Walker. That applies to the LTA and SAFE. As the California Joint Powers Insurance Authority, Jackson, and city manager will be as the alternate or his designee. The El Centro Regional Medical Center rep would be Silva, ex officio would be Solomon. Air Pollution Control would be Solomon, and alternate would be yours truly. Airport Advisory Committee, Jackson. Imperial County Film Commission, Solomon. Chamber of Commerce rep would be Mr. Solomon, and alternate would be Sanders. United Way Emergency Food and Shelter Program, Jackson, alternate Walker. Mexicali Liaison, Silva. Citizens Advisory Committee for Centinela Prison, Jackson. Transfer Station and Working Committee rep, Sanders, and alternate Solomon. Now, there were several other committees that I think that it's important to go ahead and try to appoint at this time because there's some work that's truly pending. If I understand correctly, the Regional Corporation will be Walker and Jackson. The medical marijuana, I think we may have something to report out on that, even though it's somewhat in limbo, so that will be Walker.
I think actually that can be, we're in abeyance right now, right?
Well, as I understand it from the planning and from the city attorney, that will be something that's going to be reporting out maybe at our next meeting. So I thought that committee might need to have at least be in full strength so that you could meet.
Okay.
Can you restate who?
Medical marijuana, Walker and Jackson. And the community enhancement would be Walker and Sanders. And then the other committees are more like working committees, and I will try my best to get those accomplished at our next meeting. And I will provide this information to the city clerk if she didn't catch all of those. Okay. If you didn't catch those, I will give you that information later, Diane.
Thank you.
Mhm. We're ready for item 17. And this is discussion and any necessary action regarding the appointment of a voting member and alternate member of the Imperial County Abandoned Vehicle Abatement Service Authority. I think at this point I would like to, for the council's consideration, recommend Maria Birdsall. She's
And-
been functioning in that capacity, I believe, as we,
And an
Oh, I
alternate?
as an alternate, I haven't decided. Is there a volunteer?
I
Or is
think
that
we
would
use
be a
Mr.
staff?
Williams as our
You
alternate.
use
Yes.
Mr. Williams as your alternate? Okay.
Pass.
Thank you.
I'd move Mayor's recommendation of Ms. Birdsall and Mr. Williams as alternate.
Okay, it's been moved by Walker, second by Solomon, for the member to be Ms. Birdsall and the alternate to be Mr. Williams. Okay. We're ready now for item 18. Oh, I'm sorry.
Did you, all in favor?
No, we did not vote. I'm just racing through this, I guess. It was moved by Walker, second by Solomon. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The motion carries with one absent. Item 18 is discussion and any necessary action regarding the mid-year budget review. Presentation will be by Finance Director Ms. Salcido.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Welcome to our mid-year budget review for fiscal year 2012. Today we'll be going over the results of operations from this, as of December 31st, 2011, with 50% of the year elapsed. However, while in the past I have presented for the mid-year budget review a review of our revenues, our expenditures, fund balance for the current year, as well as our projections through the end of that fiscal year, this presentation will be a little bit different. And it will be a little bit different in that it's going to include several other things. Those being, first of all, an overview of past trends, history for revenues and expenditures, some of the budget challenges the city is facing, and basically the most imminent one being the disestablishment of the redevelopment agency. We'll go over some of the major projects, future projects, and their operational expenditures, which will most likely have an impact on the general fund. Revenues and expenditures, an overview through 2017 as a result of those projects and the challenge with the redevelopment agency. Of course, we'll go over the current year operations through December 31st with 50% of the year elapsed, and then a plan of action with regards to the situation with the redevelopment agency. As an overview, with regards to revenues, as you know, as a result of the recession, the increase in foreclosures, the increase in unemployment, and decline in building and construction, many of the major revenue sources for the city were affected. They declined. The city experienced a loss in revenues of I don't know if this works there. No, it doesn't. Of $4.1 million from 2008 to 2010. The $4.1 million in loss in revenues is approximately 17% of our total revenue base during that period of time. A picture of that shows the revenues at $27.1 million in fiscal year 2007, and then the decline in 2010 to $22.9 million. That's $4.1 million decline in revenues during that period of time. Now, in 2011, against all odds, our revenues increased by approximately $1.6 million. Some of the revenue sources that increased were the sales tax and building-related fees. Now, that is good news. Increase in revenues, we'll take that anytime. However, it's to be determined whether this will be a trend or a one-time event. It is important because while sales tax revenues and building fees have increased, other revenues have declined or remain low, and those are property taxes, motor vehicle license fees, and interest. It should be noted also that we are still $2.6 million below our high in 2007. That's prior to all the major cuts that we did, so we're operating still at below normal levels. As a result of the decline in revenues, the city took steps to implement cost-cutting measures in order to align the expenditures to the lower level of revenues. The measures used for this endeavor were reduced allocations for operations for both supplies and services, as well as capital, froze salaries, postponed projects, froze funding for 7 positions. It should be noted that the city continues to operate within those lower level of operations for all of these areas just mentioned, operations, capital, salaries, and so on. It should be noted for 2011 that expenditures were below budget levels. However, the majority was due to salary savings due to vacant positions. The combination of the increase in revenues in 2011 and the decline in expenditures, or the lower level of expenditures, rendered a net income, revenues over expenditures in 2011 of $785,000. But then we get to our budget challenges for this year. That was previous years, 2011, 2007 through 2010, decline in revenues. And then we have challenges. The most imminent challenge being the elimination of the redevelopment agency, which could have a potential impact of $1.4 million to the general fund. Some of the areas affected by it will be, for example, number one, the $449,230. The general fund would be losing this revenue from the allocation. We allocate overhead to the enterprise funds, to the redevelopment agency for some of the general fund activities. If we don't have a redevelopment agency, we will not have an agency to allocate that overhead. So in other words, more will have to go to either the enterprise funds or will have to be funded by the general fund. That's number one. So loss in revenues. Number two, the annual required contribution for post-employment benefits in the amount of $40,000, that's the corresponding amount for the redevelopment agency. If the redevelopment agency is not there anymore, it will have to be funded either general fund or allocated to other, most likely the general fund. Then we have expenditures for personnel. That's redevelopment expenditure, redevelopment personnel, as well as low and moderate personnel. The total cost for salaries for those two areas is $730,000. However, the state has allowed a reimbursement of approximately $250,000 to $300,000 to cover some of these administrative expenditures. The other area affected by the disestablishment, the elimination, is in the area of supplies and services. If we have operations, if we continue to have operations in this category and for redevelopment, it will have to be covered by the general fund. The amount is $400,000, and it covers things as supplies and services, capital expenditures, and within that is the $14,000 contribution for Imagine, as well as the $3,000 for the contribution for the Film Commission and IVEDC. Some of the programs will also be affected to the tune of $151,620. Those programs include public information, $14,190, special events, $68,550 for graffiti removal, and $28,880 for the code enforcement. That's half. The other half is already being budgeted out of the general fund. So overall, the total expenditures for these activities total $1.6 million, less the $250,000 allowance from the state to cover administration. The impact to the general fund would be $1.4 million. Now, in evaluating the RDA programs, it should be noted that the continuation of these programs will mean funding that program from the general fund. The amount again, as $1.4 million, and it's allocated as follows. Salaries would be $480,000 for 28 programs, $151,000, and then operational is $230,000 approximately. It should be noted in evaluating the programs, RDA programs, it should be noted that all programs are important, and they meet the city's strategic plans and goals. However, budget constraints set the limit for funding, and we have to determine priorities to abide by those budget constraints. There is a lot of information going back and forth between the state, our various attorneys, as to the specifics and details. However, there is still a lot that hasn't been answered. We're still sifting through the information. So at this point in time, we really don't have specifics as to how we're going to proceed, how this is going to end, basically. We're prepared. We have a plan for you, and like I mentioned before, we've already started sifting through all of these expenditures to review them. With regards to, we also have discussed the impact of the disestablishment of the redevelopment agency with regards to our bond monies and the fact that we had allocated those funds for various projects. In a conversation today with several of our attorneys, it was determined that we can continue to fund those projects out of the bond proceeds that we had originally anticipating using for them. In addition to the redevelopment agency, there's other budget challenges ahead of us that should be considered with regards to all future financial planning. Some of the other challenges are the increase in operational cost of $2.6 million as a result of future projects. Should be noted, this is a worst-case scenario. These are estimates yet to be, the final numbers yet to be determined, but again, we wanted to show you what the worst-case scenario was for each of these projects. We have 5 major projects, and number 1, for example, the fire station, number 3, set to open May 2012 at a cost of $500,000 per year for operations. Again, these projects are new projects, and they've been financed. The construction has been financed by either redevelopment, bonds, impact fees, but operations will have to be financed out of the general fund. We have the skate park at $150,000 operational cost, sports pavilion of $300,000, then the aquatic center at $1.5 million. Again, worst case scenario, assuming, for example, that the pool stays open year-round versus 6 months. We have also considered within the future projects the increase in operational cost as a result of the library, the lease for the library building. Again, $129,180 for next year. While we have options, or we have considered other options through CDBG, I wanted to show you, just in case that doesn't go through, this is what the general fund will be impacted with. Another project ahead of us is...
Can you go back?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me the circumstances under which you figure out those worst-case scenarios?
Worst-case scenarios, these are estimates. This is based on, for example, for the fire station, we're taking the numbers from the other 2 fire stations, averaging, looking at what the number of personnel that were initially thinking that station is going to need. The aquatic center, for example, that's assuming...
But I think what I'm hearing is worst-case scenario means the entire operational cost has to be paid out of general fund.
That's it.
Exactly, that's the worst-case scenario. But again, a worst-case scenario, those are high numbers. Those are, for example, I was getting to the aquatic center, assuming that the pool stays open year-round, that would be $1.5 million. Let's say we haven't adjusted to what if it's only open 6 months or during the summer months. So this is a worst-case scenario, 12 months. But these are all general fund expenditures.
Is the worst-case scenario for the fire station, is that implies that we're going to hire new firefighters, or?
Yes.
I'm trying to get a grasp, but that's not the case, though, is it?
These numbers were taken from our...
If I may, if we went and followed the NFPA full staffing, it would be at 500,000. If we stay at minimum staffing, which impacts operations, which is what that discussion still needs to occur with the fire management of how we'd approach that. If we did everything that was required in NFPA, we would be at 500,000. If we're not able to do that, we'll have to do something different, which may be not full staffing under NFPA, National Fire.
My understanding of things was that the personnel that would be housed.
Mr. Silva, would you please, for recording purposes, would you please speak into the mic?
For sharing.
My understanding of the fire station is that most of the personnel that would be working out of there was already working for the city.
To open the station, we have the personnel to open the station. These numbers were if we went to full National Fire Protection Administration standards, there would be 500,000. So that's why I wanted to give you worst-case scenarios. So we can open the station, we can operate the station, we can open the pool for less. We wanted to give you what, if things were working optimally, this is what the cost would be. Obviously, we have to bring all that down. So we have the budgeting and the staffing for opening the station, but that's at minimum staffing. And that's how it was. By the way, these numbers, except for the library lease, were reported this time, well, last March, in the budget presentations.
Yes.
So what we're reminding you is that hasn't changed.
That's right. The numbers stay the same. They've been the same since the budget presentations of last year.
I think there's an additional
Yeah.
question for you, Ms. Sussy.
Yes.
Question on the fire department. What are we, on the increase of staff, what does that number represent?
I do not have that numbers in front of me, but I think it takes it from the, I'm going to misstate it, and we would be going to NFP standards, what I think adds one person per crew. See, I'm going to misstate it because we asked Chief Burns to put that numbers together, and it's a detailed report that has that. But this would meet the national standards as opposed to minimum operating standards, which is what we're budgeted for, and clearly we'd like to be at optimal standards.
And the skate park, is that also represents staffing?
That's well, go ahead, Miss. If you go to the microphone so we can pick it up on the recording.
The skate park figure, there will be no staffing, so the skate park figure would be lights, as well as any grounds maintenance, electricity, things like, water, that kind of, those fees.
What is involved is an opening and closing of the facility, but this park has been designed under the California Joint Powers Insurance Authority as to the way we're operating. It keeps our liability to an absolute minimum.
So you're saying this is the worst case scenario. Is there money that was already allocated for that in the skate park, and this is in addition to if we're doing something different?
Oh, okay, she's got to stay there.
No money has been previously allocated, and this is just an estimate. It's like Ms. Salcido said, it's probably high, but it's worst case scenario. I have no way of knowing how much the lighting. We've done the best estimate we can, and we'll be able. It'll be very minimal grounds maintenance, but we will have to add it into our contracts that we already have. And so, based on the figures that Mr. Legakis is giving me as to what it's going to cost based on the acreage to add it, things like that. That's kind of where the number came from.
I think we're getting kind of held up on the whole worst-case scenario. Obviously, what this means is we are looking to bring on 5 new facilities or projects. They'll be operational in this coming fiscal year. This is the increased cost to the city to operate those new facilities. And we're looking at the high side
Right.
of operating those facilities to certain standards that we would like to attain.
Yes.
Potentially. So I think maybe instead of worst-case scenario, we should focus on, this is an increased cost that will be new in this next fiscal year or the year after when we bring these new facilities online.
Okay. Ms. Salcedo, do you have some additional, yes, Ms. Walker, thanks for the explanation. I think she fleshed it out quite well. The word worst case, I think, sent shivers through many of the council members. So I think Ms. Walker truly brought it to some consensus as to what the intent of this presentation is. Any other council member have any questions? Ms. Salcedo, would you continue, please?
Yes. In addition, another challenge is the library building. As you know, as a result of the 2010 earthquake, the library building was substantially damaged. We will be moving into a new location, and I believe we have a lease for the next 5 years. However, at some point in time in the future, the city will need to decide as to whether we should construct a new building and start moving in that direction. We need to build up enough funds for this endeavor, so my recommendation is that at this point in time, we set up a library reconstruction fund and that we allocate one-time revenues. For example, last year we ended the year with $785,000 revenues over expenditures, net income. Therefore, we could decide, council could decide as an option to allocate some of those funds into this fund for that future expense and start doing that on an annual basis. Another challenge that the city, and this is just to recap again the presentation that was made during the budget process, is the increase in CalPERS cost. The worst case scenario, or the projected increase in cost, $2.4 million over the next 4 years. Again, it could be as low as 1.5, but according to the actuarial study, it could be as high as $2.4 million. Another.
Letty, can you go back? How do the, now that employee groups are paying a portion, how does that play into those numbers?
This is just the employer cost. It does not include the employee, yes.
For the council, as you recall, several years ago, CalPERS did not recognize its losses and rolled its losses forward to 2013. So now that losses from 2008 statewide will come home, and every city has similar numbers. The only way that those numbers get smaller is if there's a significant increase in the portfolio of CalPERS. So, for example, the 2013 number was actually, this time last year, a bit larger, as I am I correct on that?
That's correct, but that's also as a result of an additional smoothing technique that the CalPERS is.
So these costs here are really associated with prior costs that were not recognized in 2008, 2009, 2010, all the losses, and they rolled them forward to, well, to buy themselves sometime at a statewide level, and that's why these things are so large. If you notice at the 2014 drops at 2015, that recognizes the payoff of the side fund, if you recall, which has to do with law enforcement. The law enforcement, we were paying prior year funding on that, and that finally gets paid off at that point, so then it drops back down from either item, but that goes back to the 2000 decision.
But the problem, Mr. Duran, is not just the losses rolled forward. The problem is that CalPERS continues to have this unrealistic expectation of a 7% return on investments. It's not going to happen. I mean, currently, they're not projecting full job recovery expected until 2016. The current projected shortfall in the governor's budget is $9.2 billion. That's what the governor says. Legislative analysts says it's closer to $13 billion. So we're continuing with this CalPERS smoke and mirrors, these games in terms of rolling losses forward, and then a totally unrealistic expectation as to what the return on investment is going to be. So we're going to continue to get further and further in the hole until CalPERS wakes up, or we have pension control crammed down our throat, which is what's coming next.
That's why the worst-case scenario is probably a more realistic picture in this case.
Oh, absolutely.
Any additional questions or comments for Ms. Salcedo or Mr. Duran? Hearing none, Ms. Salcedo, please continue.
Another challenge is OPEB, which is Other Post-Employment Benefit Liability per GASB 45. This liability is, according to an actuarial study, $8.1 million for fiscal year 2011. However, it should be noted that we have funded 100% of that liability as of that date. However, in that actuarial study, the previous one, it was also estimated that for fiscal year 2012, the liability would increase to $9.2 million. So while we are fully funded as of 6/30/2011, it's a liability that continues to increase and that we will most likely have to continue funding at the tune of, according to this schedule, the annual required contribution, $945,000 in fiscal year 11, and then to increase to $1 million in fiscal year 2012. There is, however, a new study in progress that we're required to make every couple of years, and that study will determine what the actual liability will be for fiscal year 2012. So while the previous study indicated that the liability would increase to $9.2 million, it is yet to be determined what the actual will be, and that is in progress. The other challenges is that the city continues to operate with reduced levels of staffing. As mentioned before, as a result of the sharp decline in revenues, the city froze several positions, I believe it was 7, at a savings of $485,000. So we continue to operate with reduced staffing levels, and we continue to operate with a reduced level of allocations for operations, supplies and services, and capital at the savings of approximately $1.5 million.
Do you need a drink of water, Ms. Salcido?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
I think I need medication.
Okay. So what I did is...
Or do we need a break? Is that, would anybody need a 2-minute break?
No.
No? All right. Ms. Salcido, please continue.
Okay. With regards to what I did is I developed a schedule that shows that puts together the various challenges, such as the increase in CalPERS, the increase in cost due to the library lease, the increase in cost due to new projects, and I scheduled them out over the next 5 years, just to see where our expenditures would stand in each of those fiscal years. For example, in June 2012, we have $23.7 million in expenditures. And what I did for 2013, I said, okay, those $2 million that we cut in operations, let me start gradually adding it in to our expenditures. And so I added $1 million in 2013 and then $1 million in 2014.
The news is keeping us hot. We were... Everybody's trying to get water and everything, and we're going to make sure you get a cup of water, Ms. Salcido.
I have one.
But Mr. Jackson leaned over and he said he thought it was getting warm in here, and I said, it's the information you're presenting us that's making us all hot.
Okay. So basically, for example, we started with $23.7 million in fiscal year 2012. That's the first column. That to increase to $26.9 million. However, within that in 2013, however, that shows the full expenditures for the redevelopment agency, $1.4 million, the highlighted amount at the bottom. And then it also, what I did, I included $1 million out of the $2 million that we cut in 2010, just to start adding it in. It includes the increase in CalPERS cost, $125,000, increase in for the library lease, $129,000, fire station, $500,000, and $75,000 half a year's operations for the skate park. So that means that the increase from 2012 to 2013 would be from $23.7 million to $26.9, and so on each year, as we add on the various projects, as we add on the increase in liability for CalPERS and the increase in the lease payment, up to the point where in 2017 our expenditures increased to $36 million. However, it should be noted on that last column, that $4 million, I plugged in the amount. That's a one-time expenditures for the construction of the library building.
Just a moment, please.
Yes.
Now, did you get your water?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. I'm looking at this estimate expenditures through 2017. Now, I'm assuming that these are very realistic numbers based upon the worst-case scenario.
Yes.
Okay. All right, and of course, in column 2 for 2013, the disestablishment of RDA.
The
Is that right?
1.4, yes.
The 1.4, all right. Okay. And this lease for the library, that's based upon the information that we received several months ago?
Yes.
Based upon that escalated clock?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe 3.5%.
And then in CalPERS, it's like, these numbers are really high.
These are the numbers that, for example, for CalPERS, the 125,000, 1.2 million, 600,000, 500,000, those were the ones that I have in the previous.
I
there.
remember those in the previous slide,
Mhm.
but it just seems,
Mayor, if I may,
yes, please.
Ms. Salcedo,
Yes.
would you let the council know what the source of those numbers are?
Yeah, give me
The source for the CalPERS is the actuarial study performed by an outside consultant, Bartel and Associates.
Right.
For us, an Al-Qaeda,
Yes, that's Bartel.
that Mr. Bartel.
Yes, and the reason we're using him is because
He's-
CalPERS
he's-
wants to use their rate of return, which is they're never meeting, and so they keep falling farther behind. And we've used Mr. Bartel for a number of years, and for those of you who are not familiar, when I first met Mr. Bartel in 2000, when they brought forward the enhanced retirements, he was the only individual at the League of Cities meeting who's indicated that how this was going to collapse itself on the 5th year, and it did, almost to the month. A number of cities have now retained him. He's very direct, methodical, and if you ever sit through one of his presentations, he's a true actuarial. It will overwhelm you with numbers, but he's been spot on. On this. So his numbers are not CalPERS. He's not using 7.5% rates of interest. He's using what is projected based upon best economic information.
I've had the distinct honor of sitting and listening to Mr. Bartel here and at the League. So I was just wondering, I appreciate you giving us the source, and this then speaks to the issue that was raised by Ms. Walker. These numbers are more realistic because they're coming from an individual that we ourselves engaged and hired to provide this information for us. Okay, is there any other questions or comments? Mr. Jackson?
The $4 million one-time for the library construction, is that present-day dollars, or should we be projecting future dollars?
That's present day. Like I said, Ruben and I, our city manager and I, we sat down and we looked at this potential liability in the future, and, you know.
If I can address a couple of elements associated with this, we looked at the cost of this building. For example, in this building, ran about $4 million. Am I correct on that? I'm sorry, what was the cost? No, this is 1.7. But 1.6. And we looked at what are some of our construction costs for an open building. There are no redevelopment funds available to us in the future, and even if somehow FEMA and EMA came forward, they require you to front all the money. But as to date, we're down to a couple $100,000 they're talking about for trying to do some refit or nothing about it. Correct, Mr. Hagan? So we're not anticipating any funds available on that. And as some of you are painfully aware of, they still have not paid off the Northridge quake yet, and of course Katrina has not been paid off. So we're way down the list. So the $4 million, we need to either start putting the funds away, have additional funds to bond in a different manner than RDA. It's just going to be completely different, and the idea of bonding anymore in the state of California is almost gone, where the entire state's ratings, bond ratings have all declined just because you're in California. So that's why the $4 million. Clearly, if you don't have it, you're not going to do that. And the same thing with any of the increased costs. The intent of this is to indicate if we are not paying attention to the expenditures, clearly it'll get out of control through normal acquisition. That's why these new programs, new facilities, we're going to be looking at those costs to get those costs and keep those costs down. As you notice on there, we're showing $75,000 in 1 year for the skate park, the next year $75,000. Clearly, if we find out it's less, that's good. We'd rather show you what the worst case could be.
Madam Mayor, if I could ask a clarifying question with regard to the library. Does that include, or are we looking at the demolition costs for the existing library? Because I think we also have some asbestos issues with the existing library that would, I would think, impact the cost of demoing that.
It would just be higher. Once we got closer to that, we would start doing the surveys of what the building would require. But at this time, there is no funds, and that's where we get back to. If we receive one-time funds, which we should not be using for personnel costs or ongoing costs, we start putting them into that kind of an account to get ready for this.
To clarify, though, the $4 million projected here does not include demo of the existing building, or it does?
I think it's just for construction of a new building.
Well, I thought it was, if I may, to piggyback up on the question asked by Ms. Walker, I thought the $4 million was to be set aside in preparation for whatever we may wish to do with that building, either demolish it or reconstruct it or whatever.
The $4 million, according to my presentation, would be for construction of a new building or refurbishing or getting another building ready for use.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any additional questions? Is there any additional questions for Ms. Salcido?
Not on that slide.
Okay.
That's scary.
Continue, Ms. Salcido.
With regards to revenue, and I'm leading back to a chart, a graph where we'll see our revenues and expenditures. But in trying to determine what our revenues for the next 5 years will be, I started out with fiscal year 11 at 24.5. Those are actual revenues. Then for this year, 2012, 24.6 million, which includes some budget adjustments that have come up after the budget was adopted, and we'll go over those in a subsequent slide. And then what I did is I projected, worst case scenario, only $250,000 increase over the next 5 years. So with that, our revenues increased from 24.5 to 25.8 by 2017. And that's the graph. The lower line, purple line, is the revenues, and then the expenditure line is the blue line at the top. The difference, that gap, will have to be closed in order to have a balanced budget. In order to do that, again, this is worst case scenario, higher expenditures based on initial estimates.
Yes, and I think it's on the revenues. Ms. Salcido we've been struggling with this for actually over a month, and then again, having to modify this with the Supreme Court decision on the redevelopment. Literally, this has been working on these numbers as quickly as we can. And it's important to note that two things obviously have to occur is the blue line needs to come down. And a number of things will impact that, but it's not just a little bit, it's quite a bit, and which will also impact decisions made for certain pieces, certain items. The other part is the blue line, these are conservative numbers both directions. So we gave you worst case scenarios. We think we'll do the 250 per year. By the way, a $250,000 revenue increase is the equivalent of a Garcia's shopping center. It's the entire filled out shopping center. So you'd have to build one. So we're talking we would build 5 of those in the next 5 years. Well, can it go up? The answer is it'll go up, but not at the rate that would just miraculously save everything. The other there are a number of things that can also occur is the state legislature may intervene on the CalPERS issue and actually roll it again forward. Well, it doesn't solve the problem, but it just buys you a few more years, and we'll see where that is. Ms. Salcido.
And what that would do is buy us time in order for the economy to continue to recuperate and get better.
But I have a question before you
Yes.
leave the slide, please. Actually, it may be on your previous slide. It is. It's on the previous slide. I'm looking at these, if I'm looking at it correctly, projected income here, the 250 for the fiscal year 13 through 17, 250.
$250,000 increase per year. Yes.
And that revenue stream will be from what sources? Are you thinking property tax, VLF, sales tax?
I'm thinking sales tax because that's the one that...
Predominantly sales tax.
Predominantly,
Okay.
and/or building-related fees. Those were the two major ones, two other revenue sources that were majorly impacted by the decline, by the economic decline.
Could you quickly
Yes.
name the top three revenue sources? Because everything else is very small.
Sales tax, property tax, and the motor vehicle license fee, triple flip.
Yeah, VLF.
And it's in that order, am I correct?
Yes.
I think
Sales tax,
it's the
property-
sales tax, the property tax is controlled by, of course, Prop 13.
Yes.
And while it declined by, what percentage would you say property tax declined in the 4 years? 17%. It can only come back at
17.
at 1% a year, 2% a year, I'm sorry,
Yes.
of the new base. And it's projected that could take 20 years. So property tax outside of new construction or turnover properties is not going to have significant impact. So that's one side of the equation. It's sales tax, and quite frankly, it's what brought about the $800,000. Well, that looks like, well, wow, you had $859,000 increase. Recall that in 2010, there was no projected increase. They were all decreases. There was a bend in that chart. So we don't know if that's a one-time, if that's ongoing. Clearly, we'd like to see an $800,000 increase compounding all the way out, but it is not likely for the simple reason we'd be back to 2007 numbers. That boon has come and gone. So no one is talking about that. I think that's why we took a more conservative approach. Would it be a little better? I think so, but it's not going to be $1 million a year.
But I agree with you in that regard to the extent that we're looking at this from a projected lens, if you will. But at the same time, I think it's important for us to all understand that the sources of income that you're looking at are those four categories, predominantly the top one, which is our sales tax.
Sales tax, yes.
So this $250,000 is a little low to me.
I do think that we're going to do better than that, but
I do too.
not significantly better to make any difference on the overall gap.
That's
Is there any additional comments or questions for Ms. Salcido? Hearing none, Ms. Salcido, do you have some additional slides?
I just want to point out that the expenditures, again, include that $4 million, and therefore that line, the blue line going up, is quite high, but that the $4 million is not an ongoing operating expense.
Yes,
it's
okay.
just a one-time. Basically, these charts are being presented in order to look at, just to let you know, we're considering, for all financial planning purposes, the situation with these new projects and their operational expenditures in the future. It will guide us in setting priorities based on the city's strategic plan. So when determining the mode of operation, the term, and so on, we will look at our strategic plan to determine how to move forward. We'll be looking at in setting priorities for those projects, we'll be looking at timing, the scale, the size of the project, and the level of operations. For example, as mentioned before, the pool, we'll look at options, 6 months of operations versus a full year. Again, this is a worst-case scenario, and we'll continue to budget, to balance the budget based on those priorities. Now it's our fiscal year 2012 mid-year budget review. And with regards to this current year's results of operations, we are at 31%. As of December 31st, 2011, we have received $7.4 million in revenues out of the $23.7 million budgeted. That's 31% of the total amount. The revenues are normally at this level at this time of the year. That's because most of the major revenue sources come in during the second half of the year. As an example, sales tax and triple flip, the second line at 27%. The triple flip, we normally receive in January and May, that's sales tax in lieu. So we receive that normally in January, half in May. And as of January, we received $1.6 million for a triple flip. The other one at 3%, the motor vehicle in lieu tax, that's another one of our major revenue sources. We normally receive half of that payment in January, the other half in April, and for January, we received $1.8 million. So it is normal to be at that level, 31% at this time of the year. Revenues are on track. We've received some of the major revenue sources in January, and we'll continue to get them. I believe that 2 other major revenue sources in April and May.
Ms. Ozeta, before you leave that slide, you can see the top 3 revenue sources, which are property tax, sales tax, and lieu. There is a nuance that so the council can look at, because you may be reading about these in other cities, and that's tax anticipation notes. School's been using them for years because all of theirs comes to property tax. But cities that do not have a fund balance are now having to borrow that money at a very hefty interest rate. But because we have a fund balance, we can carry ourselves through until the funds flow through. So not only does the reserve provide you with the some reassurance for a rainy day, it also means you're not having to borrow money in the winter to get through to get to the spring, and that's what you're getting out of it, and that's worth, quite frankly, that substantial amount of savings and interest that we're not paying. But without the fund balances, we would be asking you to do a tax anticipation note, which you're going to see more cities doing very soon.
The building-related fees seems surprisingly high and good, given that I don't see a lot of construction going in the city. What's the source of that revenue?
The building-related fees, I know that for last year, we finished the year a little bit higher. It was due to 2 major programs, the projects, the Coles and
the power station.
The power station,
In fact, the power station was probably about 2/3 of that. Oh, about he left. That's about 200,000 of that is power unit number 3. Otherwise, we used to be at $1 million back in 2007.
And then for this year, don't we have the 2 dealerships?
Yes, the dealerships were also pulled this year. Again, but the big dollar item was the power station. But we used to be at $1 million. All these line items used to be much larger, and so it wasn't just one thing that brought down the $4 million. It was everything coming down. And in housing, as you're aware, there's no major subdivisions that are underway anywhere in the valley. A few being finished up. We have some. We've had some starts of individuals wanting to finish some, but as of today, well, as of the last month, I think we've done 2 new homes.
Building-related fees were $1.4 million in 2007, and this year we budgeted $300,000, which is close to what we've been receiving for the past 2 years. 2010.
There's an additional.
Ms. Salcido?
Yes.
What falls under the fines and other revenue? Is that code enforcement, or what is that?
Fines and forfeitures, for example, court fines, parking fines, vehicle code fines. Other income, we have insurance recoveries, interest earnings, insurance recoveries, miscellaneous.
Thank you.
I think you'll see at the end of the year, for example, we had a large recovery on litigation just this month, and you'll see that number jump. But again, they're so rare, they fluctuate, and you really can't count on that. Other fines, they almost are treated as one time. Would you say, Ms. Salcido, we really don't count on them to be flowing through at any even pace because they have so many different sources.
Yes. Where am The next slide, expenditures, and I'm going to jump to the last slide for expenditures. There's two. Total expenditures as of June 30, total $10.8 million, and that is 46% of the total expenditures budgeted for the year. That is within acceptable range at this time of the year, 46%, really with 50% of the year elapsed. The only two categories above the 50% mark, the only two categories above the 50% mark are general government at 54%, and that's due to, due to the timing. Liability insurance of $1 million, which has to be paid at the beginning of the year, as well as a LAFCO payment at the beginning of the year. The other category that's above the 50% is park maintenance, but that's due to the capital expenditures at the beginning of the year for the bike path. So overall,
Salcido, I'm sorry, can we go back to that prior slide? One more. Okay, so police and fire, 9.1, 5.6. So combined total of police and fire represents what total of our budget currently?
That's about 80-something%. I already have those numbers.
Well, it's
It's
$23
about-
million, yes, $23 million versus the 14.
Okay.
Oh, 55%.
So you want the 9.1, and the 5.6 over total for the general fund? Is that the question?
Yes.
Which is divided by 23 point. So it's 62%.
Actually, though, if we, general government, you said it includes things such as our liability insurance?
Liability insurance for CJPIA.
Okay, so that's not further allocated down by department? That's
No,
just a general category.
that's
So
non-departmental.
if we took that out, because everybody benefits from that.
Mm-hmm.
And what did you say, the initial?
So it was at 60, what did I say, 62%?
Okay, so if we cut, but if we carve out the 5, I think we get a little more realistic picture as to what the total slice of the pie is.
Any additional questions on this slide or any of the three that she had advanced toward? Ms. Salcido, you may continue, and you can advance those slides that you've already covered.
Again, we ended the year, fiscal year 11, with $6.4 million in fund balance. That's including the $785,000 of net income. We're projecting $23.7 million in both revenues and expenditures. That's excluding any impact from the disestablishment of the redevelopment agency. So without those expenditures, we would be projecting, my projection would be to end with a balanced budget and an ending fund balance of the same amount as the beginning of $6.4 million. Allocated as follows, 10% for the economic unknowns, $3.4 million, $1 million for accrued leave liability, and vehicle and major equipment replacement of $2 million. Again, those allocations based on our financial policy for reserves and designations. However,
Okay, take another swallow of water.
oh no, it's hot.
Do you need a break, Ms. Salcido?
No.
Okay.
So the previous slide basically presented to you revenues and expenditures without any of the impact from the redevelopment agency, but of course, that is not the case. If things go through as the state plans, there will be an impact to the general fund from their operations, at least until the point in time that we determine further action, what other revenue sources, how the state is going to finalize this whole situation. So I was trying to determine how we could carry forward with our operations until the point in time when the state finalizes and gives us clear direction as to which way to go with regards to the redevelopment agency. So I started looking at this year's budget, and I took into consideration all of the budget adjustments that have been made year to date. And what I did is I added to revenues, for example, $509,000. So we had a balanced budget, but now we add $509,000 from, we received notification that our triple flip, we would get a one-time payment triple flip from a previous year adjustment. So they adjusted, this is money that they didn't pay us last year, we're gonna get it this year. So it's $509,000. Then in expenditures, we're saving in expenditures $441,000 as a result of the CalPERS shift in expenditure to the employee. That's for half of the payment. So I added back those $441,000. There's been other budget adjustments with regards to expenditures. For example, there was that cancellation of the Department of Corrections contract. So those $255,000 that we had allocated for these expenditures will not be used for this endeavor anymore. So that pot of money is available. Other adjustments are, for example, council approved a change order for $60,000 for the Buckland Park bike path. Some other adjustments with regards to Parks and Recreation, $18,000. So I show that as a negative, deducting it from the increase in revenues for this year. Then there's $300,000 allocated, and that's not on your slides. I had the title, but I didn't put down the number. Right. So add or deduct $300,000 for the splash pad repairs to be paid out of the general fund. So the net adjustment to revenue would be $770,000. The first column going down that schedule shows that the impact to the redevelopment agency will be a negative $449,000, then $902,000 for the first one is a cost allocation. The $902,000 is for operational expenditures and salaries. So the net impact if we were to deduct from the general fund a full year's worth of operations RDA expenditures, we would end up the year with negative $574,000. However, this disestablishment is supposed to take effect as of next month. So what I did with the column farthest to that side, the east, is half a year's of operations for the redevelopment agency. And if we were to deduct all of the operational expenditures, or half a year's worth of operational expenditures for the redevelopment agency, and if we included the other budget adjustments, we would end the year with $101,000 positive. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, at least for this year, and that would provide the city with the opportunity to figure out a course of action, clarify all the information coming from the state, and so on.
Betty, we also expect to get some money out of the splash pad.
Exactly, and that's the full cost. That's not including any reimbursement at this point. That is unknown. I didn't want to include it in.
No, I can see why, but we do expect.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mr. Solomon has a question at this time.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this, and I've come to the conclusion that since we have some time with the RDA, let me say it like this. First of all, I'm very supportive of the RDA, and I think that everyone else has seen the benefits of what they are capable of doing. I noticed that one of the things in our agenda for today is the housing element, where they talk about how the city should perhaps take that over. You know, one of the things that has occurred to me is that I've oftentimes wondered, have we taken the full advantage of the RDA? I remember when I hired The Rock, Mrs. Piedra, to work for me, that while she was working for the county, one of the things that they did, and did quite well up under her leadership, was they were out looking for funding. They did all of the grants, and they did a tremendous job in looking for grants. Now, I know that grants has gone down a little. I know they don't pay as much for finder's fee or the administrative costs, but it is something that I know that Marcella does well. I know that Deborah does well. I know that that staff could do that. We have a little bit of time. It would seem to me that if we start looking for things that could possibly assist them in making this 6 months and then moving into the next year, that we need to start doing those kinds of things right now so that we can get a jump as far as next year. And I would like for the council to give their input as to this particular ideal and maybe other ideals for the RDA, so that perhaps this is a program worth saving and making sure that it is around, because they do a tremendous job for small businesses. They do a tremendous job for housing, first-time apartments. Matter of fact, all of their money pays for their employees, and in addition to that, it pays half, I think, of Bob Williams' salary. They have been able to keep the money in the house. If you look at other cities, the RDA money is all over the place. I mean, they pay for everybody. And so we have been able to do a tremendous job up under the city manager and Marcella's leadership in making sure that we don't get lost out there. I would like to see us look at how we can do something as a group to assist them in these next 6 months with new ideas.
The unfortunate thing is, while we all embrace RDA and recognize the value, the Supreme Court ruled otherwise. So now we have economic development. Perhaps we can use that arm to do some things.
Yeah.
But RDA, I mean, I think we all shed buckets of tears when we got that news that the Supreme Court had decided what they decided. However, I think that Mrs. Salcido has certainly presented us a picture that has, she said, light at the end of the tunnel. I'd like to think of it as I had said to Mr. Hernandez upon his retirement. It's a lighthouse and not a train. It will guide us. As we all know, lighthouses are intended to do that. If you're off on shore and you don't know your way back, it will guide you. I have reasons to believe that we will be guided forward, and I think that this picture that you presented, financial picture, worst case scenarios included, still has an element of optimism and hope, and that's what I think we can move forward with. I don't know if there's any other questions, any other comments, or taking into consideration the statement made by Mr. Solomon, and I think we all would embrace looking at ways to continue the funding stream through economic development. Is there any questions or comments? Mr. Duran, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think there are comments that will likely come when Ms. Salcido gives a presentation on the housing items.
All right.
Associated with the successor agency.
With the successor agency, okay. Mrs. Salcido, have you completed your presentation?
Just that any immediate actions will follow the strategic plan, financial policies, fund balance policy, and a balanced budget, which is the city's goal.
Yes, Ms. Walker?
I'd like to compliment the Finance Department on an excellent presentation, mid-year budget review, and I know that the establishment of the budget is one of the two most important things that this council does. And I think we do it with very deliberate consideration of all of the strategies that Ms. Salcido provided. One of the things we talk about is the setting of priorities and how those are reflected in the budget. And I want to share my personal priority is that we retain our RDA employees. And I would like to see every effort made to find a way that all of those employees are transitioned to other positions, because I think what they do, to echo Mr. Solomon's remarks, I think that the work performed by our redevelopment agency is vital to the economic success of this valley. I'm also committed to jobs in the valley. I think we all are, and I think this is not the time, certainly not the governmental agency, the city council that I'm a part of. I would hope, think that it's a good time to lay off employees. So I would like to see a priority made on retaining staff to the extent we can.
I think that sentiment is shared by everyone at the podium, at the dais here, Ms. Walker. And we will have to maybe name it something else, economic development, for example. And I think as Mrs. Piedra come forward telling us how the successor agency will transition from RDA into, hopefully, the city, that would give us some understanding. In addition to that, I think she will also bring to our attention some of the letters that are being battered about and some of the legislation that's going to be battered about and that's sponsored by Mr. Padilla, and whether or not the legislative body will embrace his particular legislation in the form of, I'm going to categorize it as an argument for the benefit of extending the time frame from which the RDA will be eliminated. So, Ms. Salcido, is there anything else you'd like to add? Mr.
That
Duran?
concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Duran, anything else? All right, we're ready for item number 18. I'm sorry, item 19. Discussion and any necessary action regarding approving the preparation and submittal of a coalition letter for Senate Bill 659, Padilla. Senate Bill 659 would temporarily postpone the scheduled February 1, 2012 date to dissolve California 425 redevelopment agencies. Mrs. Piedra, please.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. Yes, and as you pointed out, Mayor, this is a request that we received in support of the SB 659, which is being introduced by Senator Alex Padilla, which basically, in essence, is asking to extend the dissolution, as obviously you're well aware, effective February 1 of this year. We no longer will have redevelopment agencies. The bill, in essence, what it does is it asks to postpone the dissolution date from February 1 to April the 15th. And at this time, what they're asking for is for cities, organizations to support the bill. And we have, as part of your council packet, a sample letter of support that has been provided to the various cities, other agencies, other organizations, so that it can be submitted. This is a letter that can be provided by our mayor or city manager, and basically it's just to support SB 659.
Are there any questions for Ms. Piedra?
I don't
Walker?
have questions, but I have a couple of comments.
Sure.
One is I feel that any letters that the city provides carry much more impact if they're tailored to our specific situation. And I think that our RDA agency, our RDA, has been a stellar example of all that's right and all that can be done with RDA. So I will be voting in favor of sending a letter of support. I just would ask that it be tailored to specifically address some of the great things that our RDA has accomplished. Secondly, if we were all going to be available, I would recommend that the letter
We
be
all
signed
signed.
by each member of the city council to give that little extra oomph to the governor to understand that this, we're taking this very seriously, and this requires his attention.
Is there any additional comments or hearing none? Ms. Walker, is that in the form of a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and had multiple seconds, starting with Jackson and then Solomon. Moved by Walker and second by those two gentlemen to accept staff's recommendation and have a letter drafted to send out in support of Senate Bill 659 with all 5 signatures of the council members attached, emphasizing some of the, and framing some of the work that our RDA agency has done and the significance it would mean for this community. Ready for the vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimous. I'm sorry.
And we're all aware that there's another bill that was heard at noon today, and I don't know what the outcome
I don't think it
was
was
of
very
that.
good. It wasn't very
Steinberg held it was held in committee today at noon that had to do with
And
the
Steinberg is
housing.
not,
housing.
is that something you're going to be reporting on? At this
Not
time?
at this time, but it's a bill related with housing. And
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
bill
Reform
does
to
not
housing.
have any funding
No, it
associated
doesn't have
with it.
anything, it's a hollow, well, how do I be polite to Senator Steinberg? It's a shell of a bill, as far as I'm concerned. But nonetheless, he has it being advanced through the legislative bodies. Mrs. Piedra, are you going to be doing something for us on item 20?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct. And the resolution for consideration has to do with the creation or becoming the successor housing agency for the redevelopment agency. The way AB 26 works is, in essence, you're going to create 2 successor agencies. The housing agency has to be created through resolution. With respect to what we call the general successor agency for the El Centro Redevelopment Agency, no resolution has to be adopted, as the city of El Centro, when the El Centro Redevelopment Agency was created, by law, you automatically become the successor agency for general redevelopment matters, which in essence basically consists of continuing to pay the obligations of the redevelopment agency, which in a later item you have that enforceable obligation payment schedule. In essence, this successor agency for the El Centro Redevelopment Agency is going to ensure, in conjunction with an oversight board that has to be created before May 1st, you're going to oversee the payments of these obligations within this enforceable obligation payment schedule. So the way we're identifying, I guess, these divisions is that you're going to have the successor agency doing general redevelopment and winding down activities of our redevelopment agency, and then you have a separate agency that strictly deals with the housing assets, housing liabilities, housing matters relating to the redevelopment agency. So the resolution before you basically consists of creating this successor housing agency in order for this successor housing agency to maintain our fund balance that we have in our housing trust, and also retaining ownership of the property that the redevelopment agency has, and obviously fulfilling obligations that we still have as it relates to our housing activity. With the creation of this successor housing agency, as was pointed out by our Director of Finance, you do get limited funding to be able to continue operating this housing agency. Even though everything is uncertain at this point, what we do know is what we have available in our housing trust, which at this time we have approximately close to $3 million available to us to be able to do projects, programs. How those programs are done, those projects, obviously we're seeking legal opinion. What we are of the view, based on the information we're getting from our attorneys is that we can use those funds to continue offering programs and projects to our community if we become this successor housing agency. Also, as you may recall, in 2007, we set aside $2 million in bond money to be able to do projects. We also can retain that and be able to complete those projects with those funds. So we do have some funding available. Obviously, for us, it represents a pretty substantial amount of money, which that's the basis for our recommendation for you to consider this resolution before you to create the successor housing agency for the redevelopment agency.
Sure. Yes, you may, Mr. Bacon.
So clarification, this action that we requested does not supplant the county housing authority. This picks up the activities of the redevelopment housing activities into a separate agency, because there's been some misunderstanding about what this was. And in the original bill, it did look like that, but in the last, that's why there's an X1, there was an amendment on the floor that fixed some of these items on the housing side in August. So this does not supplant the county's program or that authority. It just picks up our current projects, which includes our mortgages and the housing land associated with the RDA.
Mr. Jackson.
Question, Ms. Pedro. As stated in AB 26, the Oversight Board, would that consist, or would that be made up of this body in lieu of the redevelopment board, or would we be then establishing a commission that would oversee this?
Actually, the way the oversight board is going to work is there's 7 members that are going to be part of this oversight board. The City Council of El Centro gets 2 appointments, and we're going to bring back the discussion item for you. But in essence, it is not the City Council who is part of this oversight board. The mayor has the authority to be able to select 2 members to that oversight board. The other members come from a representative that has to be appointed by the County Board of Supervisors, a member from the largest special district that we have with the City of El Centro, and 2 others that relate basically with school districts. And so the membership is mixed, but the City of El Centro Council does get to appoint 2 members to that oversight board.
So AB 26 clearly states the
Yes, there is
establishment
membership
of that.
requirements.
Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions? Mrs. Pedro, I have a question. You
Sure.
made reference in your presentation regarding $3 million that we have available plus the $2 million, or is it in addition to the $2 million that we set it aside for a total of 5, or is it a total of 3?
No, it's a total of about approximately $5 million. And the amounts that I'm referring to have to do with our fund balance that we have in our housing trust, and the $2 million that we haven't expended from our 2007 bond issue that we did.
And for those members of the City Council that may have been present when Manuel Perez came down and met with us in the RDA conference room, we talked about this very much in trying to structure the type of committee that would be formed, insisting that the city at least have an opportunity to have some membership on that oversight committee. I think many of you may recall that. Mr. Duran, you may recall that. Ms. Pedro, obviously, you recall it. And I'm not sure if Mr. Silva was in the audience at that time when Manuel Perez came down and provided us information on how we were trying our best to preserve and save RDA. But having said that, what's the pleasure of the body regarding this resolution? It was moved by Mr. Jackson. Second by Walker. Resolution number 12-10, a resolution of the City Council of the City of El Centro determining the City of El Centro shall retain the housing assets and functioning of the dissolved redevelopment agency of the City of El Centro pursuant to Health and Safety Code number 34176. Ready for the ballot? All in favor?
Aye.
This carries unanimous. Yes. I'm sorry, did you have something?
Going back, just on, I know time is of the essence on the letter that we're going to try to draft before the governor. Do you have a time frame on that?
It should be out by this week.
There's been a request for a 5-minute break, so I think that everyone might enjoy stretching a little bit. The council is ready to resume. After the recess, all are present and accounted for. Mrs. Pedro, are you still at the, okay.
Yes.
We have item number 21, discussion and any, discussion and any necessary action regarding the readoption of the enforceable obligation payment schedule required by AB X 126 in order for the City of El Centro as the successor agency for the redevelopment agency of the City of El Centro to be able to continue making its obligations through June 30th, 2012.
Yes.
Ms. Pedro?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. That's correct. What the item before you is consideration to readopt, and the reason why we're saying readopt, as you may recall, back in August of 2011, the redevelopment agency, and you also see a companion action in your redevelopment agency agenda that requires the readoption of this enforceable obligation payment schedule. In essence, what we are doing is we're recognizing that the El Centro Redevelopment Agency has debt obligations, payment obligations, and as you will note in the enforceable obligation payment schedule that is attached to your council summary report, it is a combination of bond issues that we have done, also agreements that we have in place. It includes, obviously, the cost of the employees and contracts we have for the projects that we are implementing and funding with our redevelopment agency. The first interim enforceable obligation payment that was adopted by the El Centro Redevelopment Agency was for the period of August of 2011 through December 31st of 2011. In light, obviously, of the dissolution of redevelopment agencies, and in order for us to continue fulfilling our obligations of the payments that are owed based upon these bonds and contracts that we have in place, we are required by AB 26 to prepare and amend an updated enforceable obligation payment schedule, which covers us from January of 2012 to June 30th of 2012. And basically, that's the updated payment schedule that's before you for consideration. And you will note that it includes all of the debt that the El Centro Redevelopment Agency has. So we are required to readopt and recognize these obligations, again, in order to be able to make our payments.
Are there any questions from Mrs. Piedra at this time? Okay, it's been moved by Jackson. I have a second by Silva. All in favor? I'm sorry, yes. Thank you. Is there any opposition? Hearing none, then the motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Piedra. Excuse me, we're ready for item 22. Discussion and any necessary action regarding the award of a bid to the California Commercial Pools, Inc. for the installation of the wet plate renovation adjacent to the El Centro Community Center in the amount of $298,000 and requesting additional funds in the amount of $70,800, which will cover 10% contingency, $29,800 and $30,000 for the construction manager for a total project cost of $357,800. Presentation will be by Ms. Reister.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and Council. So before you is the award to bid California Commercial Pools, Inc. for the installation of the wet play renovation. It is in the amount of $298,000. We are requesting an additional amount of funds to cover not only the bid that came in. I think we had originally anticipated about $250,000, and we're also requesting $29,800 for contingency, as well as $30,000 for a project manager. We definitely want to make sure that we don't have this issue again and that it gets done the right way. I did receive a call today from a potential construction manager, and he had asked me who we were recommending the bid go to, and he said, wow, that's a great contractor. So that was really reassuring. So I think that I think that this will be a good way to move forward and that we'll get it done. The RFP as well for the construction manager is out and is due on Tuesday.
Are there any questions for Ms. Feaster?
With regard to the $30,000 for the construction manager, what period of time and what's the scope of duties and responsibilities that you would see that person fulfill?
Well, they would basically be out here on the job site every day, making sure that the contractor is doing exactly what they're supposed to do, what the requirements are to the T.
So would they have responsibility for reviewing construction documents, for building plans, inspecting the pipe, or
Yes, and I don't know if Terry wants to add anything, but yes.
Everything.
Everything.
Request for information, change orders, anything.
And there are consultants out there that have this expertise that would be willing to perform in that capacity.
Yes.
A question by Mr. Jackson.
Would that then also place the liability on the construction manager for any faults of the construction?
I would assume so, but I don't know.
Well,
if-
only within the scope of their work.
Right.
Right.
Not the design.
There's something missing out of the plans that we go back.
So as long as the construction was per the design and the plans, and he follows that, then in essence, liability, if there was a fault, would go back to the construction company.
Construction
Or the
manager.
designer.
Right.
Okay, any additional questions? This is a replacement or completion or upgrade of the
This
old
is-
splash pad.
This is, I would say, complete renovation. It's
we're
a
taking-
tear
we're
out.
taking
It is.
everything out.
It's a new design. It's I mean, we're going to salvage as much as we can salvage. That's another thing we need to consider is that we don't know what is exactly going to be salvageable until they get in there and start ripping everything out. So we have some line items in there just in case if we need to. We do know that we are going to definitely have to replace all the in-ground components to the splash pad. We're hoping that all the big, taller standing components will be able to be salvaged. We are also salvaging some controllers in the control panel and things like that, but we are completely redesigning the entire splash pad.
And the time frame for completion, please refresh my memory.
It's I think they have 3 months. It's or 90 days. 90
It should be
days.
ready for summer.
It will be, yes.
Okay.
It will be ready.
Mayor, if I might,
Yes.
this bid is in conformance with advice from not only the city attorney's office, but outside counsel associated with the litigation
Okay.
related to the reimbursement of this.
So are we going to be like documenting as they're deconstructing the pile
Excuse me.
of junk that's out there right now? Are we going to be documenting just how poorly constructed it was by the first company?
Yes, well, and we also, I mean, they didn't do a soils report or any testing prior, and we
Right.
figured that out once we, when we did the adult center, and then, we realized that they hadn't checked the soils and they hadn't done, so that right there, they are at fault. I don't know if Ms. Becker has an update, but.
I mean, we've made plans, because
Yes.
as we start to remove what's there, we want to be documenting that and preserving that as evidence, right?
Right, for the lawsuit, certainly. Yes. Just a quick update on the litigation. We filed a default against the contractor because Casron Services is still an active California corporation, according to the Secretary of State. The court kicked it back, saying that the agent for service of process did not indicate on the notice of acknowledgement and receipt that he was signing on behalf of Casron Services. So we're going to have to reserve them, have him sign appropriately on the notice of acknowledgement and receipt, wait another 30 days, and then file another request for default. So then collecting on that default will be the next step. And I have been exchanging phone calls with Arch Insurance Company's counsel, but we've been playing phone tag, so I'm not exactly sure. She initiated the call. I'm not sure if she's calling to discuss settlement, but I'll find that out once we actually touch base.
Without the benefit of having the plans from the previous, is this the same size? Is it larger, smaller?
It's the exact same size. It's just a little bit different configuration, a little bit different footprint. So we just, but it's the same.
There is, since we built the first one, the health standards have changed, and we've had to upgrade the
sanitation,
the sanitation
yes.
aspects of it, so it's more costly, because now we're required to use UV, et cetera. So some things have changed.
Any additional questions for Ms. Reister?
No, I look forward to the grand opening. This is long overdue.
I know.
Okay, so is that a motion for approval?
That's a motion.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Silva, second by Mr. Solomon, for approval of resolution number 12-11, resolution of the City Council of the City of El Centro awarding the bid and authorizing the execution of a contract for the wet clay renovation project to California Commercial Pools, Inc. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. We're ready for informational items 23 through 27. Any task force reports this time?
I will report that the community enhancement task force is going to meet tomorrow, community enhancement, and I brought copies of the agenda for folks to see, preview of coming attractions for tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Oh, well, okay, thank you, Mrs. Walker, and that's at 11:30 a.m.
Lunch will be provided.
Good. Is there any other committee reports at this time? Or task force reports? Hearing none. Any public comments? Anybody in the audience wish to address the council on any item at this time? You may step forward and do so. Seeing no one come forward, we are now, you want to omit the recess so we can just get out and go home? I'm assuming nobody needs an additional recess, okay? I will start with Ms. Walker, if there's any mayors and council members' reports.
First, I'd like to congratulate the mayor on her recognition yesterday at the Martin Luther King event.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I especially appreciated the quote in the paper about your leadership and mentorship for the next generation. I thought that was very apropos. I am going to pass out another reminder with regard to the regional transportation plan at SCAG. We do have 2 workshops that will be held specifically in Imperial County, the first being on January 25th, follow-up workshop, and these are both designed specifically for elected officials. Second workshop being held on February 2nd at 1 o'clock from our, that'll be a video conference from SCAG's Imperial County office located at 1405 North Imperial Avenue.
I'm scheduled to be there January 9th.
Excellent, okay. That concludes my...
Okay, Mr. Silva?
Just a couple of save the dates for the council. One is, even though it's not a city function, it's a city. There's 3 alumni Dancing with the Stars sitting at this table through another hat that I wear through the ROP Community Foundation. So we'll be having our 4th annual Dancing with the Stars Gala on March the 4th. Hopefully the council members can join in. Maybe in future years we can get Mr. Jackson or Mrs. Sanders to be one of the star dancers for our gala.
Glad to be back.
The other one is, this year is the 150th anniversary of Cinco de Mayo celebration, and in talking to the Mexican consulate, who, by the way, is going to be one of the judges at Dancing with the Stars, she's getting direction from Mexico City to really promote Cinco de Mayo this year and make it a bigger event. A year ago, we had a classical guitarist that performed at the Old Post Office Pavilion, and it was a very successful event. So I'll be getting together with Christy, and I spoke to her a few days ago about perhaps planning something in the city of El Centro to celebrate Cinco de Mayo in a bigger way. I know budgets are tight and so are theirs, but we're going to have to figure out a way to do it. Thank you.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Couple things. On January 12th, I believe I joined Ms. Walker and Mr. Silva and Ms. Sanders at our city attorney's retirement luncheon. Also that night attended the business showcase for the joint chambers. Had the opportunity to stand in for our mayor on January 14th at the Snowbird Breakfast. and also had a opportunity to see our mayor receive the award yesterday at the MLK I Have a Dream Breakfast. It was a nice event. Quite a few people at the Barcelona, so looks like it's going to be an annual event, and I think they said next year they're just going to be honoring one. They kind of did honored 3 individuals this year to kind of kick it off, and so look forward to attending that again next year.
Okay. I want to welcome Mr. Solomon back. I think that we've missed you, Mr. Solomon, and we're happy that you have returned and to your rightful place. And so welcome back.
Thank you.
And I think he deserves a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. I joined with the city manager, and we went out and welcomed the Blue Angels, and it was a little different concept than I had anticipated, but we went and we sat on the tarmac and waited for the Blues to fly in. They landed and came over and greeted us all, and they seemed to be very happy to be back in California. I attended the MLK breakfast, as has been already acknowledged. I was very pleasantly surprised to be the recipient of that honor. I take it as a humbling event. Also went to the Airport Advisory Committee, and they are still struggling with what they're going to do with the airport and how they're going to make it more attractive for individuals who fly in. So with that, I have nothing else to report. Mr. Duran, do you have anything you'd like to say?
I think that's everything.
Ms. Becker, nothing? Anybody, and nobody else in the audience? Hearing nothing, then we will adjourn the city council meeting and get ready for RDA. Our last RDA meeting, right?
Thank you. That's an important note. After 40-some years.
I don't even know what I did. I had an agenda here somewhere, but since I have no idea where it is. Thank you. Okay. So I think we can admit roll call. We're all present and accounted for. Public comments section is redevelopment agency welcomes your input. You may address the agency by completing a speaker slip and giving it to the secretary prior to the meeting. At this time, you may address the agency on items that are not on the agenda. The chairman reserves the right to replace a time limit on each presentation. We have approval of our consent agenda. Moved by Jackson.
Second.
Second by Silva. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. We have one final action, and that is adoption of, which is readoption rather, of the enforceable obligation payment schedule as required by Assembly Bill 1X26 in order for the City of El Centro as a successor agency for the redevelopment agency of the City of El Centro to be able to continue making the obligations through June 30, 2012. This is a companion that was held and heard by the City Council. Are you going to make the presentation, or is that just?
I think
Just-
I remember.
Okay. So what's the pleasure?
So moved.
Moved by Jackson,
Second.
second by Walker. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. All right, we just have some informational reports. Is there anything that anybody wishes to ask about any of these items that are informational?
I did ask Ms. Piedra to please advise the agency with regard to page 6 of the Agency and Economic Development Project Status Report with regard to HCD not having approved the environmental review. This is with regard to the RDA Colonia grant.
Yes, just an update on this particular grant that we have. It's specifically for the benefit of the El Dorado Colonia. This is a grant that was awarded to the city of El Centro back in 2010. And the issue is when we applied for this grant to the state, we actually were awarded $800,000 to improve the drainage on the northeast part of the El Dorado Colonia. The situation is in February of 2011, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which administers the Colonia Set Aside program, issued a memo indicating, providing guidance to the states that have colonias and that offer or provide colonia funding through the state set-aside. In California, we have 5% that is set aside under the Colonia program. In essence, what this memo from HUD indicates is that the priorities for the Colonia funding should in essence be targeting housing activities, water and wastewater needs that you might have in the Colonia. Historically, as you may recall, the type of projects that we have completed in El Dorado Colonia have in essence been street improvements that we have done, and they've been successfully done. This phase 4, what we have described as phase 4 under this Colonia grant that we have, is basically to do drainage improvements. Even though HCD has not confirmed or indicated that they might reconsider that grant award, we get the impression that because of this memo that was issued by HUD and the fact that in this memo what it's saying is the states that have managed Colonia programs cannot identify accomplishments, and so they have an issue with the funding. I know that last year there was a Colonia Roundtable presentation that was scheduled. Unfortunately, at the time I was out on maternity leave, so I couldn't attend, but I believe our city manager, Mr. Duran, attended. There is a follow-up roundtable discussion this Friday that's going to take place as a follow-up to this. And believe me, we have been constantly asking HCD what they're going to do with this grant for the city. Obviously, we're ready to move forward. We did an RFP to solicit design services. We were ready to award, but they did not approve our environmental clearance. They placed it on hold, indicating to please place on hold the award of that contract. They indicated that they're going to have a discussion with us as it relates to the grant, so we're hoping that this Friday, when they do come down and have this roundtable discussion on the use of Colonia funds in Imperial County, that this is a subject that we're going to be discussing. And Mr. Duran, I don't know if you want to add any.
From that meeting of last spring, if I may, it was well attended by the county and all the cities because the Colonia projects cut across all of them. And the county pointed out, because of this position on drainage, that all 12 of their colonias would then not pass funding environmental review. So all of their funding in the colonia programs would also be, because in this area you cannot build a home unless you resolve the flooding problems. And the reason the state's going through this is because National HUD, the federal agency, it says we just want our money to go into housing. But in areas such as Imperial County, which is very flat, there's no real drainage, you can't build a home without doing drainage, and we made that very clear. But when they're doing this from Washington, they're saying, well, everywhere else seems to drain well. So we have this dilemma, particularly the county is even worse condition, that they are not going to be able to spend their Colonia dollars without getting additional funding from somewhere else to do the drainage aspect of it. It's very frustrating, but every city and the county had the most colonias were there. And we indicated you cannot go forward on these projects without allowing it. But what's driving this is actually not the state Office of Housing, but federal. And it's a national push to focus all funds into actual housing reconstruction, rehabilitation, and no money for offsite.
So we'll have an update after the meeting on Friday. Would there be any need for us to have a special meeting prior to our next regularly scheduled meeting in February? I mean, is there a plan B that we have to come up with so that we don't lose that funding?
It's going to depend on the position that HCD takes. Or at least my concern is that we got the grant awarded based upon the criteria that they had established. And in reading that memo that HUD issued to the states, to the various states, there is a section in there that talks about each state knows their communities and each state can identify its needs. What HUD has done is it has given you the priorities, which is what we go through when we do our CDBG annual action plan. But at the end of the day, they leave it up to the city to determine where your needs are and what priorities you want to focus on. That's going to be the argument that for sure we're going to make, or that I'm going to make on behalf of the city, is that, okay, HCD, you know what the needs are for Imperial County and its colonias. then work with us in trying to address the needs. When you compare the percentage that is allocated for Colonia fundings here in Imperial County, the state only sets aside 5%. Other states set aside 10%. And so there's the difference there. And even within Imperial County, they have made the Colonia grant application process competitive.
Right.
So we have to compete against the Imperial County Colonias to try to get funding for our Colonia. And so that in itself, we struggled with that, indicating that, there's needs. I mean, how much can you really do with limited funding? You have to phase out your projects. Well, now that they have changed their position as far as what type of scope of work you can do, it's even limiting even more what we can achieve in our Colonia. So it's an ongoing discussion. Again, our argument and the strong argument that we can make for our city is that the grant was awarded based upon the criteria that they established or that was in place when we applied.
Right.
This memo or this guidance memo was issued at a later time. So if they want to apply that, they can apply it for the next funding cycle. But I believe that we have a standard agreement with them to perform. So obviously the state can change that and they can do whatever they think they need to do. But that's going to be our argument is that
It should be prospective, not
Exactly.
not effective currently
So-
planned project.
So what would happen, the question, Ms. Breda, is what would happen to the funds?
If the state basically decides to not grant us the money, they would keep that $800,000.
Okay, that's,
Yeah, if the source of funding it's not Colonia funds, it comes from home funds, am I correct?
No, it's Colonia. It's from the
Colonia
Colonia set
funds.
aside that
Yes,
we
set
have.
aside, but if the funds are not spent, that 10% goes back, that
5%.
5% goes back to...
They basically designated for other programs within the HCD.
Right, the other programs of the HCD. So, and because they're getting less and less funding...
That's
one of the big differences, quite frankly, because the Colonias can only be, how many miles from the border?
150 miles
150
away
miles
from
from
the
the border. Clearly, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas has a different approach because more of their state is on the border. And they're still using those same federal dollars. In California, there's very little left. So that 5% is more concentrated, and so the interest is not as great because we don't have as much
cities on the
border as the other three states do. So again, those states have taken a position, there is more communities to deal with, and so that's why the larger percentage, and also, quite frankly, more liberal approach to funding colonias in those three other states.
okay, and the meeting Friday is scheduled for, it'll be held here in El Centro?
Yes, it's a discussion that they're going to be holding with representatives from the county and the cities that have colonias. And so we're going to be attending.
Well, I believe that you and Mr. Duran will certainly present take a strong position and present a strong case for the value of what we're trying to accomplish here.
Absolutely.
It's, okay, thank you. Any additional questions? Okay, Mr. Jackson has a question on the bid report.
On the bid report,
Yes.
it still has me as the vice president of the bid. Back in November, I resigned from that board. And
Oh, okay.
the new vice president is Bob Blakemore from KYMA.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.